Would you believe me if I said I intentionally didn't shave to do this video because facial hair just seems appropriate for this era? Misha here, and back out at the cabin. And last time I tested your patience with quite a few wheel guns. This trip, don't worry, I mostly brought modern stuff, including AKs, but I did bring a couple of Old West U.S. Army replicas from Cimarron. This one's a Uberti. If you didn't see this last time, it is a 7th Cavalry, model 1873, and it is relevant to this video. So I did bring it out to try, and of course it fires 45 Colt, 45 long Colt metallic cartridge. And this was the U.S. Army's really first widespread cartridge revolver. You can kind of get into the details about the Smith & Wesson, even Colt, like Richard's conversions, but this really was where they settled. And they had about 37,000 of these, using them all the way from the Indian Wars through the Spanish-American War. And that really shows you on the number side just how small the U.S. Army, U.S. Cavalry was at the time. But this was their sidearm. What about their long arm? That's the topic of today's video. The Springfield. Hey, this says Springfield right on the side here. Model 1873, so adopted the exact same time. Trapdoor. Specifically the Allen system for the 4570 cartridge. And this is another Cimarron replica, because originals would not look this good. And this is from Pedersoli. And this is actually something I've wanted to try out since I started being a distributor, dealer for Cimarron at the shop. Kind of think of new avenues with the AR and AK market so dead this year, and it's worked out pretty well. Kind of gives me a different demographic. But I also have been trying their guns out to share with you guys. I know it's a niche thing, but there you go. This is pretty cool. And this is the Cavalry carbine. And there's a really good reason that I do prefer having one of these over an infantry rifle. We'll get to. And we'll examine all the features. I don't know how much daylight we'll have. We'll probably have to head in for too long. We'll pick up inside at the cabin with Miss Peanut. Man, that's a smooth hammer. Smooth. And the trigger. So if you'd like to help support us, yeah, like, share, and subscribe, and comment. There's always Patreon or Super Thanks as well. And you know, it'd be a really boring video if we didn't shoot this. And I just so happen to have an extra box of 4570 405 grain Black Hills. Let's try it out. Trapdoor time. You know, I've been told by those who are more into this than I am that Pedersoli makes a good gun. And I was concerned, because I've seen some of their more commercial grade, high grade guns, and they have a whole lot of fit and finish on the bluing, the color case hardening, and most importantly to me, because, you know, feeling the wood. I'm very happy that while this one has great fit and finish, the wood has that military oiled finish. Because if you gloss it up too much, to my mind, it just comes across as commercial, not military. Yeah. Normally I say first shots. This will be first shot. Black Hills. Ammo. This is gonna hurt. No? Honestly? That's shocking. Keeping pretty good ejection there.
I was just wondering the same thing.
Yeah. Not shabby at all.
Yeah, pops them right out. That's cool.
Yeah. That was frankly more fun and less thump than I was expecting. Darn it, I kind of like it. Anyway, quick little blurb on the history of this gun coming to be. Again, our Colt was a product after several years of trying to convert Civil War era cap and ball revolvers. They had the Colt 1860, they had the Remington 1858, and a smattering of others. First shot. Let's see how she does. You know, that rear sight's so small, I can't see it. I like I'd do one more. That sound. And this was the purpose-built one, based on the 1872 open top, just further refined. And it really became popular with Cavalry, 7.5-inch barrel, and was standard issue officially until being replaced by the Colt 1892, but in practical terms, it hung around for another decade. And they tried a similar path with their rifles, because following the Civil War, to no one's surprise, they had tens of thousands of muskets, muzzle-loading muskets. Now, breech-loading guns, even repeating guns, were in service. There's the Henry, the Spencer, and several other designs. They started off doing paper cartridges where you rip the thing off and your powder and your patch and your ball barrel, and then you dumped it in, and that would evolve into a breech-loading paper cartridge effort, but paper has limitations. Anyone who's ever tried paper shotgun shells knows what I mean. Pretty impressed. So you can, if you just do it a little bit weaker, it'll just lay here. I was doing that because I do want to save my brass. And they would evolve into metallic cartridges, still black powder. Lots of different things. They had a lot of testing and trials following the Civil War. What they didn't have was a lot of money. So, they wanted something. They knew they had to go to a breech-loading cartridge gun. Muskets were just way out of date. They just didn't have any money after the Civil War and Reconstruction was happening. And so testing would happen at Springfield with really a gentleman named Erskine Allen. There's a name. People are taking baby names and they'll change the spelling. How many ways have you seen, like, Michael or Ashley spelled or whatever? No. Let's swing back Erskine. That's an awesome name. And Allen with an I, A-L-L-I-N. He was the one working at Springfield that kind of came up with this trapdoor system where your breech flipped up. And while the 73 here was a purpose-built, cartridge gun, the original idea was we're going to take our muskets and we're going to cut the rear off and put this breech on and try to modify the hammer. And the muskets were 58 caliber. And they did look at doing a 58 caliber cartridge, but very soon this was scaled down to a 50 caliber cartridge. And what they would do is they would line the bore to taper it down. And this lining practice we see up through World War I. Look at the Italian Vetterli. It was lined down. So that was the idea, to save money, single shot breech. They did look at Remington's rolling block. It would come out. They also would continue looking at the Spencer, which was a repeater. There was even the Henry lever action wasn't going to make it, but the Navy did adopt in small numbers the 1866. We actually looked at that in a past video. I'll even flip up the rear sight for you. Not that it does me much good. That's fun. A lot of testing, a lot of experimenting, not much money. The very first Allen conversion was the model 1865. There's 66, a 68, a 70. This was all internal work at Springfield, small batch numbers. Again, they had some rolling blocks they did. Now, they were pretty much going off Congress, but sometimes the conversions, especially like rolling block conversions, would cost more than if they just built a dang new gun. So they had to eventually come to terms with the fact that even though we've got all these Civil War era muskets, converting them just, even if you save $1 or $2, it's so messy. Each gun is in different conditions, serials all over the place. You know, consistency, interoperability of parts. The Civil War is really when the idea of parts should be able to swap from one gun to another in a serious number. It was just a mess. And finally, in 1872, the military said, okay, we'll do a board. It would be led by General Terry, and they would look at designs to pick a purpose-built, brand new production breech loader. We still don't have a lot of money, but hey, if you can make it for $8-10 a gun, we'll let you do that. And the board looked at pretty much everything. They looked at the Sharps, which was a great gun, but ended up way too expensive. They looked at the Peabody. They looked at the latest rolling blocks. It had its benefits too. The rolling block is a fast action. It just doesn't have really great extraction. At least the original versions didn't. And they did look at the Spencer, even though a lot of the powers that be did the they're going to waste ammo and not be accurate shots type thing. And yeah. Ultimately, in 1873, they selected the Allen design, no longer a conversion here. Officially, it was recommended by the board, the Ordnance Department accepted it, and therefore Springfield got to work later that year. And the first guns were packed up and ready to ship out in December of 1873, and just based on kind of what I know, and I could be wrong, I believe they actually were the 22-inch barreled Cavalry Carbine, not the 32-inch barreled infantry rifle, because there seems to have been more of a need out west for a compact mounted rifle for troops, because that's kind of the frontier. You know, Indian wars are going to kick off and just all that stuff. And the first ones were pretty small batches, but then they would continue delivering more and more of both models throughout the 1870s. Exact contract numbers don't really seem to be known, doesn't matter, but they seem to have had batches coming in at a good regular clip for over a decade, falling into the 1880s. So yeah, you had the infantry rifle, the Cavalry Carbine. There was also a cadet rifle with a 28-inch barrel. Not surprisingly, it was for training schools, cadets. And it really wasn't meant for frontline use, although there is some accounting of, guard use, that kind of thing. Curious about angles and stuff. Yeah, seems like for good ejection, just having it tilted either horizontal or just fully back is...
So it starts to slide out on its
Yeah,
own.
I think it's just kind of the way to go. When you put it down, it kind of... Very nice gun. And the Cavalry was definitely a major player. They were almost their own thing. The Army was the primary customer, with the Cavalry subordinate to them. And that was it. The Navy and Marines only had limited numbers of the 1873. They did have some. I don't want to say they didn't, but not that many. You also had volunteer units getting some. You had National Guard, state militia level units getting some, especially as they were older ones rolling out of service, because they did continue to improve the design, ultimately leading to the model 1884 and the 1886. So pretty much an Army gun alongside its revolver counterpart. You know, and I talked about why your birdie started making reproduction single action armies in the past video. How did Pedersoli start making reproduction 1873s? Cimarron's relationship with them. And which model variant is this? Because, you know, if you look at the original guns, they changed it over time. Well, we're going to get a little up close and look at this to see which model they replicated, how well they did it, or did they kind of blend features of different models. And if they did, even then I might give them a little bit of a pass, because these guns would be rebuilt, re-arsenaled, and parts get mixed around because of that GI parts thing. It's one of the big reasons they went with this. You might wonder, why did they go with the Trapdoor and not something maybe better? Because this was frankly good enough. They had good above average accuracy. It was dependable. They found that recruits picked it up quite quickly. It wasn't a gun that had a real, you know, big learning curve, which pretty evident with our shooting. Let Jero give the Trapdoor a go.
You know, when I was first looking at this thing, I was wondering, you know, how complicated this whole mechanism was going to be, if it was going to be like intuitive to a modern day shooter. And it's really simple. I mean, when the hammer's only at half cock, lever won't come up. Second position opens up, but your trigger's dead. So, I mean, that's good. Makes sense from a safety perspective. That drops in pretty easy. That closes. I mean, it's if you're not used to, you know, an older firearm, this was just really intuitive and easy to do.
It's just easy to pick up and figure out in a few minutes. You know, a little bit of instruction and practice, and there you go. And it was economical. They could produce these for pretty much what a conversion would have cost them. And you have consistent serial blocks. You know, everything's neat and tidy. And yes, parts could swap between the earliest and the latest with very few exceptions and very little fitting. This was a revolutionary idea in that day and time. This is also why U.S. military guns, martial guns, don't have many serial numbers. Sometimes just one on them, even going back, you know, a long time ago. Whereas, you know, look at German guns, Japanese guns, British guns, there are serials everywhere. You don't need serial numbers if your parts are all interchangeable. So a lot of times they'll just be the serial on the gun. So yeah, we'll look at the reproduction today. We'll talk more about its service. And, you know, it is a lot of fun, so we will keep shooting it. At least as much as we can, because this Black Hills ammo, while good, is not inexpensive, guys. Good news is it is reloadable. For that matter, here's a 45 Colt cartridge. Same, you know, diameter type bullet, much shorter. Putting out bigger rim on that. And we will also briefly touch on how the 4570 round evolved from the original copper cartridge that, well, didn't work out maybe so great for the 7th Cavalry and others early on. And how they would ultimately make a reduced power load for the Cavalry carbine. You know, whatever we want to talk. We're just hanging out, talking old guns, having fun shooting. I will say this, even though it's unseasonably warm, it made for a good range day because we didn't have to get dressed up, if anything, a little bit sweaty. Downside, the bugs are still out. Please go away, bugs. But yeah, as we lose daylight, let's head on inside, check on Miss Peanut, and get up a little closer with this guy and keep on with our story. I'm curious how it does with a full round. I bet it doesn't pop them out. Like if you chamber one and then decide, I don't want to shoot it. It puts them out pretty good, but it doesn't really fling them. Hello. How we doing? What'd you think of today's guns? What's your favorite? I know it. Sure, nice evening out. Warm for October, but what do you do? Peanut may or may not join us because I just fed her, so now she has got what she wants from me, and she's a cat. The Carbine. Why did I want this one both as a Pedersoli and as the short 22-inch barrel versus the 32-inch infantry? The infantry was important. Like I said, they saw service. They built over 216,000 of the Model 1873 infantries throughout the 1870s and 1880s. They were there. They were used for, of course, foot soldiers, garrison duty, that kind of thing. Keep in mind, though, where the U.S. was actually seeing combat. It was out west on the plains, northern plains, southern plains, down in Texas, the Apaches, and rather famously, of course, the Battle of Little Bighorn. And therefore, since these were mostly cavalry units, they wanted the Carbine. Now, they made just over 20,000 of this model here, the 1873. However, some sources report that there are 61,000. Hey, she did join us. Hello, Peanut. They report 61,000 carbines. Both are correct. It's just that larger number includes all the models. We'll get there. We'll talk about the Model 1877, 1884, and even the experimental 1886 just a minute. As far as the Pedersoli, as I said, this is a Cimarron import. Other companies like Taylor's, I believe Dixie, Stoger, they're a big importer. They've imported replicas. And in Italy, they're made by both David Pedersoli and a Uberti. But because of contract and agreements, they kind of split the difference. This is why you don't see overlapping, competing with each other on at least individual websites. But you can get pretty much anything you want. Although, ironically, the first replica trapdoor, at least that I'm aware of, wasn't Italian. It actually was made in America from a rather famous American company.
It's weird. I actually got like better ejections, kind of like casually flipping it open, rather than trying to kind of sling it open. You know what I'm saying? Like if I was trying to put a little extra oomph on there to make it come out. I think the angle has
a lot to do with it too. Just how having gravity work for you instead of against you. But sometimes you might not want to throw it out. You might want to catch it.
Yeah. Well, this is a spent cartridge. I was just going to kind of put it in there to test it a little bit. Yeah, you're right. It helps to kind of have the angle back a little bit.
Yeah, at least horizontal, a little bit back. Further forward, it still works, but it kind of bounces it a little bit.
Boom, easy.
Yep.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, fun. In the 1970s, the Arrington and Richardson, the HRA, H&R, Trapdoor replica appears. And they have a few different versions. They have the Centennial, they have the Officers. And I don't know when production ended, but H&R kind of ceased to be in the early to mid-'80s. In fact, they went bankrupt. As far as I know, these were made in America. They could be one of those situations kind of like the replica Colts. We've talked about those before, where they were put together by like Ivor Johnson or a Colt, depending on the model, but they used Italian parts. Now, I'm not 100% sure on the H&R Trapdoor. What I do know is this Pedersoli is very similar. In fact, people have reported using Pedersoli parts to repair their H&R. So there definitely seems to be a connection. Of course, they're both replicas of the original Trapdoor. The question is, what's the quality? And, well, why didn't I buy a Uberti? Because they are a lot cheaper. Do a couple more here. That is more fun than I was expecting. In fact, why didn't I get an original? You can find original rifles. I've had them in the store, especially later versions like the 1884, but those were meant for black powder. If you want to shoot smokeless powder, even if they're cowboy loads like this Black Hills, I just trust modern metallurgy. And, of course, just not wear and tear on an old gun. And I did want to shoot this, and we had a lot of fun doing it. That's definitely one advantage, but, you know, if I find an original in good shape for what this costs, maybe I'll switch it up, but I think they're kind of going out of sight now. How does this compare, though, as far as how authentic, accurate is it? That was really my main concern, not to mention the fit and feel of it, as I've already kind of said. It's kind of funny to load. I find it a little easier to tilt down. And then to extract and eject, tilt back. It's a teeter-totter. I've looked around, kind of checked out what collectors and purists say, and overall, both the Uberti and the Petrosalli have a good reputation. The broad strokes, they're right. The furniture, the shapes, the hammer, the lock work. Some complain that the sights aren't correct, especially on the later fully adjustable windage elevation 1884 models, but this one's not that. I've also seen some pick on the way the front sight is kind of formed and mounted. So you could say that too. So in the fine details, you might complain, but really, I don't think there's a lot here to grump about. They got it right, with the exception, of course, just modern manufacturing and modern markings. And it does impress me, I wasn't expecting it, that it does have Springfield here on the plate. And I love what they did with the kind of import manufacturer's marks of putting those in the breech there. That is a brilliant idea, and it's perfectly fine because the ATF allows it as long as it's accessible without tools and easily visible. I really like the kind of grain finish on this. It feels like an actual military. It's not overly polished or shiny.
Feels like actual wood.
It is, yeah. But I mean, yeah, like it feels like it. I like how it has the marking on the plate there, and then you have the modern markings tastefully hidden, I think, here and here in the breech.
Yeah, you got one right here along the edge of the... I'm not really sure what you would call some of the components of a gun like this, honestly.
The lock, I guess, the lock work. You know, it's definitely a receiver barrel. And again, I'm super happy with the stock. I was really afraid that it was going to be kind of glossy. And the Ubertis seem to be. They seem to have more of a commercial grade wood finish. Also, more people like the bluing on the Ubertis because it's prettier. One thing, I can't see it. For another, it's a military gun. So Uberti usually gets points for being prettier looking, snazzier looking. And if you're a cowboy collector shooter and that's what you go for, I get it. But this one I like because it seems appropriate. On the other hand, Petrosalli's routinely rank higher for accuracy, you know, group formation. They're said to be with very high quality barrels. The stock channels are cut very well, which is funny because I can't really appreciate that, but there you go. And I'm not saying Ubertis are dog crap, but I've read one or two accuracy grumps with Ubertis, including with their, single action army types. Again, nothing horrible, but, 3-4 inch groups, whereas guys really expect something better. Again, they're a mass producer, and they are considerably cheaper than Petrosalli. It seems to be that Uberti examples are about 2/3, or at least 3/4 the cost of the Petrosalli. So there is something to be said for that as well. Overall way that these are made, they start off with CNC tooling in Italy, But then they do put a lot of hand fitting and final polishing, finishing overall to the guns, and it does show. Everything is just so smooth with the hammer, with the breech, things going in and out. And as we pointed out, the trigger is remarkably good for what this is. Agreed.
And I bet there's no slack on this trigger at all. I bet when the hammer's all the way back, it's in full trigger position. Let's find out. No slack. That's cool though.
They were real men back then. To that end, a lot of guys use these in different matches. They are considered match grade, especially the Pedersalis. It's one of those guns, I really didn't want to like it as much as I did, but it was a heck load of fun, at least with this Black Hills ammo. And the cartridge is an interesting story because, when you look at soldiers' complaints and praises for the Trapdoor, they more or less say it's good. They like the long range, the penetration, the power, especially with the infantry rifle. They did complain about the thumpiness, especially on horseback, especially with the lighter carbines. That's actually why, right from the pretty much beginning, we had two different bullets, or cartridges, I should say. That was shockingly fun. This is a 405 grain too, but it is Black Hills. They tend to load it a little light. You have the standard 45-70 405 grain intended for the infantry rifle. Cool. It was doing about 1,350 feet per second muzzle velocity, but they downloaded it using the same 405 grain lead bullet to the 45-55, which is less black powder behind it, and that reduced the muzzle velocity to 1,150 feet per second for the Cavalry version out of the shorter barrel too. And that was just a little bit easier on the soldier. This isn't exactly the most comfy butt plate, so I get it. And luckily the Black Hills loadings are pretty soft, so I could see it being a big thumper if you had to. And then, of course, that would evolve into the 45-70 500 later on, and good God, I would want to shoot one of those out of a carbine. But we'll get to the cartridges in a minute, because it's all part of the story and one of the major complaints, because quality of the ammunition was to blame for a lot of the issues in the 1870s. Fire in the hole. Boop.
And yeah, you would think it would have a little bit more felt recoil.
Yeah.
Honestly, it really doesn't.
Nope. I mean, that ammo is loaded for cowboy purpose, but still, it's still a big goer. Speaking of 1870s U.S. Cavalry, here you go. I've shown these off on my personal channel, Misha. These are U.S. Cavalry troopers. And as I said, I'd show it in the video real quick because he's holding the same Springfield Trapdoor carbine, and he's got a 1873. These are fully posable 1/18 scale. Again, completely nerding off. His hat even comes off, and they make several different versions. He's got the pouches, but kind of shows you how the guys were, spurs and all, with the field cap there to keep the sun off his neck. These were definitely the guys getting out there, and again, they liked them for what they were. They did well in the dust and the grit and the stuff. But the cartridge. Now, it wasn't all their fault. This was early days. I mean, the 50 70 cartridge with roughly a 450 grain bullet was the U.S.'s first metallic cartridge for any kind of long arm. It was always meant to be an interim solution. It first appeared with the Allen 1866 rifle, and it would carry over into this era. But then they would go to the 4570 here to get a little more oomph out of it and whatnot. But the original cartridge was made out of copper, not brass. And it was internally primed, meaning we don't have an external primer pocket here. This was solid. It looked a lot like a rimfire. Basically, they just took a rimfire, but they moved the primer inside. This meant it was a two-piece design that was crimped. The copper was easier to work, especially with this. It was just the early days, so you can't really blame them. But this did lead to case head separations for relative quality of the ammunition. Most were made by the Frankfurt Arsenal, but they did use subcontractors. It was just, what do you do? And that led to jams and stuck casings. And, you know, one issue that this has, kind of like a straight pull gun, is our extractor ejector here is not exactly big. And so if the case head rips off, or even just the cartridge gets stuck in there, what are you going to do? Now, one thing, if you have an infantry rifle, you can use your cleaning rod under the barrel as a clearing rod and jam it out. But you might notice the carbine, it does not have one. And there's no hole in the stock for one. And that's not something that Pedersoli just forgot to do. The Model 1873 Cavalry Carbine just had no cleaning rod on board. And so, even if you had a stuck case, what are you going to do about it? And this really became famous, infamous, June 25, 1876. The handguard is not warm, but the barrel band's a little warm, and right here, it's
cooking a little bit.
It's cooking. I bet it cools off. Very light, handy little gun. Any resemblance to Colonel Custard is coincidental with this guy. Yep, they are very clear to say this is absolutely, definitely not George Armstrong Custer. It is, obviously, but it's not. Another figure here with Shaber. Yep, the 7th Cavalry event. You know it. I hope you don't love it. I mean, Battle of the Little Bighorn. And one of the reasons that it was said that they had issues were their cavalry carbines jamming. They were using the 45-55 reduced carbine load, just so you know. But they was the early internally primed copper cartridge rounds, and there was a lot of consideration that they might have been stuck. Interestingly, some archaeological evidence refutes this, and others refute that. No one really knows, but it certainly could not have helped. And this wasn't the only time the issue was reported. It was a known issue throughout the 1870s. Nevertheless, carbines and rifles continued to be delivered, but it would lead directly to an ordnance board doing an inquiry after that. I mean, that was just something, on America's centennial at that, almost on the 4th of July. It was a big public scandal. And so, while the rifle didn't get a change, the carbine did. Second to last shot there. I'm doing better with it than Custer's men did in 76.
I was just about to ask you about some famous military applications for this firearm.
Yeah, they became rather famous with the copper cartridges for the not good reasons. Not to mention that they were weirdly internally primed in early cartridge days. The Model 1877. Essentially, they gave it a cleaning rod. They drilled out the buttstock for a 3-piece rod and broken shell extractor. It's actually very similar to what we see in the later Springfield Craig carbine. We actually had it out on Labor Day.
Yeah, it's got a little bit more.
Yeah.
You know, it's a little jumpier, but no, I mean, perfectly.
And so those would replace the originals in service. And this is obviously not that. Another area, they redesigned the wrist. The original wrists were sometimes seen to be cracking, even breaking. I mean, it's a point in any gun, but they strengthened the wrist on the 77. Went from there. And they would build just under 20,000 of this model up through the mid-1880s. So we'd have the 20,000 originals, 20,000 of the 77s. There would also be some further updates to both the rifle and carbine in 1879, like to the sights and to the breech block and manufacturing a bit. That's not an official model change. Then we get to 1884, and there's another big update, mainly to the rear sight. This is where the famous Buffington rear sight first appears, and it would pop in and out with the Craig too. It was windage and elevation adjustable. This is obviously not that, and it would apply to rifle and carbine, so you'll have those. And at the same time, they went to a new cartridge, a new loading. What'd you think of the sights?
I wasn't exactly trying to print groups, so.
Yeah.
You know, they were easy to acquire, point and shoot.
Hard to really do groups with a single shot, frankly.
Right. Well, you just got to go real slow, and that's boring on TV.
Well, not to mention you usually end up with like those rail guns, like bench rifles, where the rifle doesn't move.
Yeah, I mean, I was shooting at something out there, a little box that's maybe like 12 by 8, and it was pretty easy to just stick them in the center.
Yeah. The 45-70 500 grain bullet, presumably just for the rifles, I should hope. Now, going back to 1882, the Frankfurt Arsenal experimented with the more or less modern external primer pocket we see here, and it was put into service later that year. Still copper cartridge, but yeah, that's a big improvement. It means we can have a solid case instead of crimped together. It's just better in all right things. So then they go to a heavier bullet, and this was meant to have better range, accuracy at range with the new sight, and maybe better penetration. Interestingly, the muzzle velocity didn't really go up on the rifle, but you know, heavier bullet, once you get up to speed, it's going to stay there a little longer at range. So we have that. Here's a spent round. I was absolutely saving my brass. And then finally in 1888, they got rid of their copper cartridges. They went to tinned brass, as they call it, just basically tin-plated brass. And that gets us the modern loading. Now, these are, of course, all black powder. The bullets we were firing, though, were smokeless. And you can do that thanks to, you know, the modern metallurgy found here with the Pedersalis and the Reddies too. Jerry was asking about putting the hammer in the half cock, and that's just because your trigger is disabled until you pull it all the way back. Just a safety concern of the day and time. Mostly the carbines, but sometimes the rifles too. Saw continuous heavy use throughout the so-called Indian War period into the 1880s, and they continue to refine and update the design. Pretty cool. And really the last major experiment for the carbine was the model 1886, as I mentioned earlier. This was what we think of more as a short rifle. They extended the barrel out by 2 inches to 24, but more importantly, they extended the forestock out. It was considered a full-stocked carbine. And the idea was maybe we can squeeze more accuracy range, maybe we can get away from using the reduced power load. And so they built 1,000 test guns at Springfield and sent them out west. Soldiers had them. They were fine, but they really didn't get any improvements, so they never ordered any more. It was never officially adopted. You know, it was a good effort, but it wasn't noticeably better than what they already had, so why change up production? I get it. Another goofy thing that the U.S. was into for quite a while, even into the Craig era, was with the bayonet. Obviously, the Carbine doesn't have a bayonet lug, but, you know, socket bayonets were a thing. Beginning around 1880, they got really interested in the rod bayonet, combining the cleaning rod and bayonet. And they had a few different models trying out, and finally they got the 1888 pattern of rifle, meant for the 1888 pattern of rod bayonet, and this was the last, like, official pattern of the trapdoor rifle to, you know, see service and whatnot. The rod bayonet never was very successful. Again, they tried it with the Craig too. It didn't work out. It was just, I get where they were coming from, but it was never a great idea. Luckily, our Carbine was spared from that indignity. Its last major update came in 1890 when they added a rear sight protector, because that Buffington sight, when it was put into saddle holsters, scabbards, was just tearing stuff up. It was either wrecking the sight or the scabbard or both, so they put a protector on it to prevent that. And we'll see kind of similar things carry over to the Craig. The 1896 Craig Carbine really draws a lot from the trapdoor carbine, especially the later models like this. Pretty cool, I'd say. Speaking of later models, the 1884 carbine, they made another 20,000, giving us a total of 60 plus that 1,000 test. That's where your total of 61,000 comes from. How many trapdoors were made in total? I believe Springfield reports the highest serial was 567,882. That seems to be for all the trapdoor versions, and if you want to throw in all the Allen conversions and everything, it can go up to nearly 700,000. But it's all, when you see these numbers, it's always like, did they count this model? Did they count that model? Maybe they didn't. There's also the cadet rifle. Some call it the cadet carbine. They didn't make near as many of those, about 8,500, at least of the original pattern. And it was basically the same as the rifle, just with the 4-inch shorter barrel, 28 inches, and just a little bit lighter and handier. It was always for training, parades, school duty, at most guard duty, but it was expressly not meant for frontline combat service.
And in this particular case, I did pull the hammer all the way back. So we were kind of wondering about.
I mean, it will.
I can see how from a safety perspective that might make somebody a little edgy.
It's more of a training safety thing to give you that middle position.
But yeah, with the hammer back, I mean, like the trigger bar is completely engaged at that point. Like there is absolutely no slack to take up whatsoever. It's at the wall already just by default by cocking the hammer.
Yep, and it's a nice big trigger too. Like I do like how the trigger guard swells for extra little, you know, protection in a saddle. Skinny's up here, but it swells out. That's kind of nice. Yeah, I'm super impressed with everything here. Cartridge goes in. Just everything about this is super cool. You know, J-Ro was talking about that kind of half-cock position. That's exactly why you have it. So you can load it, and even if something happens and your hammer goes forward, something breaks, let's say the notch breaks, which is not likely on a modern gun, but, you know, old metallurgy, you've got that stop there where it'll hit there unless it's fully back, and that's why you've seen me mostly loading it that way, just to be 100% safe. I'm real cautious about when bullets are around in things. I kind of have to be in my life, guys. It was a really fun day. Even though we saved this gun to last, we were afraid we were going to get the tar kicked out of us, so we didn't want to, bruise our shoulders early. And we were both super impressed with just how gentle it was. Of course, a lot of that has to do to think the Black Hills ammo. By the way, I'm not promoting them. I literally paid for that box of ammo full sticker price. Just to let you know. Yeah, that's it's a lot of fun. Here's a spent round. They still go in. They're not swelling much.
I wondered the same thing when I was going to put a spent round in it, but no.
Yeah, no problems there. They don't quite fling out with as much authority, but they're not as heavy, and then all that. Here, I'll finish this off here. And yeah, you can go all the way back if you want, but safety kind of doesn't care for that too much. But just when you're kind of stopping an action, just kind of wanting something new, different, maybe slow my shooting time down a bit, learn some new skills. Got into these. And from that, I was looking at this on the Cimarron website for a while. And finally just pulled the trigger after a couple of my other guns sold. I've already shown you those videos, and I had to use most of that money to pay taxes and bills and everything else. But I slid off a little bit to pick this guy up. You know, a whole box of ammo lasts 30, 40 minutes shooting time with two people. So, and then it's expensive. It kind of works out, I guess. Single shots. And, to be fair, when this was adopted in the 1870s, we had, multiple repeaters. They were mostly tube fed. He had some oddballs like the Spencer. But single shot breech guns were fine. But by the 1880s, the capacity, or lack thereof, was a complaint. This is why the Craig was adopted in 1892, not to mention it was smokeless powder, to replace this. However, it would take quite a while to get the Craig up and rolling, several years, so this would keep on in frontline service to the mid-1890s, and the Carbine Craig would be even slower. Those did not appear till 1896. The very first ones were made in December of 95, but they didn't get to any militaries. This is why not that many Craigs were available for the Spanish-American War, especially carbines, Rough Riders, volunteers. As a result, some second-line units had trapdoors still. In the USA, stateside, these were still absolutely in use for training, reserves, National Guard, state level in this period. In fact, they would still be pretty widespread up until about 1900, and still officially a U.S. current gun, like in the inventory list. In fact, they weren't officially removed from the current active duty list until 1903. I guess they figured at this point we've adopted the Craig. Now we're adopting this new fangled Mauser-looking thing from Springfield. This thing is, getting quite long in the tooth, although if you think about it, it was only 30 years old. Compare that to the AR or even the Grand. The Grand served and was still in frontline use for over 20 years. And the Craig replaced it officially in 1892 when it was just 19 years young. But it goes to show you that rapid development of technology, the cartridge, then the metallic cartridge. We talked about the primer changes, then from black powder to smokeless powder, then the smaller diameter, higher velocity bullets came in. Then we'll get Spitzer bullets soon, and up through World War I, there was just a lot of changes, and then things finally slowed down for a minute. So even though it wasn't that old, and some of the guns didn't have too many miles on them, yeah, you can understand why they were surplused out, and that let a lot of Craigs hit the U.S. market, and they were kind of what was used by hunters and sportsmen and whatnot before the Kriegs were everywhere. That when I was a kid, Kriegs were like the gun that everyone had in the closet for hunting, and someone had cut it down in the 50s. And that's just it. With the hundreds of thousands of the rifles, some would be left alone, some would be cut down. But with just 60,000 carbines in total, and many of those being destroyed in service or lost or just worn out, you just don't see many trapdoor carbines. It's one of those things. And as I said earlier, they were all GI parts. In theory, you could take a part from a Model 73, use it in a Model 84, and vice versa. And that's why, you can find various little components, because experts can say, well, this hammer style was used here. You can really get into the weeds. If you think my videos are long, boring, and detailed, you can really get into the weeds. Now, do I like that? Yes, but I spare you guys most of the time. So, is this authentic? Yeah, it's good enough. And if a small part looks like it's from a later version, like a 77, just say it was swapped in service. Now, Pedersoli, Uberti both don't do a lot of reproduction cartouches. I get that. Less is more. You can always add them yourself because those are kind of specialized. They do offer some marks like on the 7th Cavalry here, because it's meant to replicate a specific gun. But they typically do these to be more, just generic service. These were built for, about 6 years before being replaced by the slightly updated model. I think a 77 would be cool too with the trapdoor, but it is neat to have the style of gun that was at the Battle of the Little Bighorn and other early Plains engagements. It is not breaking my heart that we don't have the early cartridges, though. Plus, they weren't reloadable in the first place. Anyway, by the early 20th century, this is out, and the surplus hit everywhere, and they're really cool. We had a great day, if you can't tell. It was super exciting. This older stuff, you don't know how much fun it is until you try it out. And for those that have hung out this video this long, thank you. Some of these are just kind of passion projects because they will never get many views, and I'm okay with that. Can't on the second, or the first notch, you can't. Gotta wait till the second. Hot rock in my pocket. No, very fun. Saddle ring included. And sometimes these curved cowboy butt plates can wallop you, but at least with this gun and this ammo,
Perfectly comfortable.
Yes.
No problems at all.
More fun than I expect. And hey, if you'd like to nerd out with little figures, like I said on my personal channel, I've done these. I've also done some World War II figures, and I just saw today one of the places I like is doing some Vietnam figures. And while I'm not into ones that aren't at least attempting to be historically accurate, these dime novel legends, pretty cool, honestly. I tend to buy mine from smalljoes.com. The owner's pretty friendly dude. He'll answer emails. Also, he's just right up north of me in Missouri, so transit time is very quick. I don't know. Again, the more fantasy type things I'm not into, but anything involving history, be it original full-size scale or 1/18 scale, I enjoy. But let me know what you think. Maybe we'll do more old rifle videos if you're into it. And we've done a complete series looking at U.S. Marshall wheel guns. What do you think of the bluing on this? This is one of the charcoal blued ones. J-Ray thought it was pretty attractive. Sometimes the originals were called Niter blue, but it's a little different, I know. Appreciate you guys. Nice evening. Peanut has settled in at my feet. She's a fat, happy cat. I'm sorry, not fat. She is a pleasantly plump. As always, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. Like to help us support the channel. Check out the link to Patreon, or you can do a super thanks here, or commenting, sharing, subscribing. That's all good too. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time. You have the 4570 400, you have the 4570